Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks everyone for coming to the last talk in our cyber infrastructure symposium this week. We're very excited to have Moseli Mots'oehli, a PhD candidate in computer science at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, currently supervised by Dr. Beck and Dr. Chen. Um, His work it focuses on camera-only autonomous driving in low-resource settings in Southern Africa, so active learning and learning under annotation noise. So he previously earned his master's in data science from the University of Hawaii or University of Pretoria. We're excited to hear his talk towards safer Southern African roads with camera-only assisted perception. Yeah, take it away, Moseli.
Yes. Again, intros were done. Moseli, originally from Lesotho in Southern Africa. So I came to UH 2019 to do my PhD. Then I did the master's first, and then under the supervision of Peter Sadowski. And then when I went to my PhD 2021, I started working with Professor Beck. And then eventually, sometime last year, 2024 in the summer. So in the summer, I normally go to the mainland. So in the summer, I go to the mainland, and I was there. I was lucky enough to be inside a Waymo, self-driving Waymo. And I had been working on not self-driving cars per se, but active learning. So kind of, okay, how do we get more data? And if you have less, what do you do? And I was in a self-driving car, and I figured, oh, this is the last piece of my work, my PhD work. So everything I've been working on, training models with little data, noisy data, then I figured this is the last piece. So I was like, okay, now I'm going to work on the last piece is apply the methods I've done before to self-driving. And lucky enough, Professor Chen, Kwai Chen, arrived at UH at that same time, right? So this is where we end up. That I'm from South Africa, and then I was in a self-driving car, and I think I liked it, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do now because we don't have this in Southern Africa, right? Cool. So that's kind of paints that picture. From Lesotho, came here 2019, did my master's and so on. Now I'm working on self-driving cars with the intention to actually work on this full-time when I complete my PhD with some friends in South Africa under a company we call MindForge. And our whole focus is self-driving cars. Cool. And as it stands, in 2022, for example, 12,000 people died in South Africa on the roads. And WHO estimates like 1.9 million people die on road traffic in 2023 alone, right? And there's obvious benefits if we can actually get self-driving to work. It's not going to be perfect. It's working in most cities in the mainland, especially via Waymo in cities like Texas, Arizona, and so on, states like that. It's kind of working. Most of it is ride sharing. And you get the idea there that productivity goes higher because people then do other things. Not everyone has to be driving a car. Traffic congestion. So those are kind of the main wins you get out of having self-driving work in a city. Right? And obviously things like in this day and age, safety. Some people don't like, or some people have been in cases where they get kidnapped by the driver and so on. So those kind of things get alleviated if you get self-driving to work properly in things like ride sharing and so on. Cool. And now, as it stands, so if we were to speak about the levels of autonomy, there's kind of 5 levels. First is where you just drive, no automation whatsoever. Second, driver assistance. Most of cars that exist today have some version of this, things like lane keeping and so on. And then the third is kind of partial, where you drive. Sometimes the car can drive itself for a bit, and then you have to kind of help here and there. Teslas would say have something close to level 3, where it drives, but then in hard cases, it tells you to pull the steering and drive, right? And then the highest level, you would say, like full autonomy, closer to that would be whatever Waymo looks like. I think it's arguable whether it's level 4 or 5, but in my opinion, from the experience I've had, being in one where it drives you, it feels exactly like this is it. It doesn't matter. Maybe at the back someone is helping, but you don't see it. So in my eyes, it is what it is, right? Cool. And then as it stands also, all this progress, especially in self-driving, is mostly in North America, Asia, and Europe. very little has been done in Southern Africa, in Africa as a whole, especially in Southern Africa. I understand there's other problems that we are facing there, but I could work on this. I don't have a problem with that. And then also we have a lot of models, AI models that exist, and data is mostly open source, but most of it is based on the countries that I mentioned already, the regions I've mentioned. And then now the why wouldn't you just take these models and transfer them to a different location? No, you can't, because these local road signs are different in every country, especially in Africa. Things there are different based on what we need and how we live. So different rules of driving to begin with, and regulations. For example, it's something as simple as, in the US, you drive on a certain side of the road, in Europe on a different side, in South Africa also on a different side of the road. Right, that on its own already tells you it cannot be treated exactly as same. Right, even things that you see in the roads or around the roads very different. You might see animals just cross the road, not common in Hawaii, for example, but where I come from, that's a thing. So that calls for a unique and custom solution for Southern African cases. Right. Cool. So, like, what is the task of driving exactly if you were to do autonomous driving? What you really want to know is you want to know where things are so you can avoid them. How far are they? That says what speed you can maintain and when to brake and so on. And then you have to be able to also predict where things will be. Not just you will be here in the future. You have to also predict the trajectory of the other objects that you're seeing, right? So you want to know where the things are, how far they are, and where will they be, like in a few seconds or in a millisecond and so on, right? And then finally, okay, knowing all that, where should I go? What should I do? What controls do? What should I do? Should I brake? Should I accelerate? Should I turn right or left? That's at the end of the day, that's what you want to know. You want to know how to throttle and the steering, right? Cool. And in general, so on the side here, you see I show the kind of sensors, the inputs that normally go into an end-to-end driving system. So LiDAR, camera mostly. LiDAR is quite expensive. Camera common. GPS in terms of placement and so on. Maps and radar in some cars. And the existing systems have a variation of this combination. Okay. Sorry. Cool. So now, essentially, at the end of the day, this is what it would look like. If you were to apply this, you want to know what's written on things, you want to know where they are, you want to be able to identify each thing and segment it away from other things, right? And know where the road actually is. So if you look at this image, you'll see that the road looks a certain color. Each car's position is nicely segmented. And you see like traffic lights, you see like the signs, you want to be able to know that, okay, I'm going to merge here and so on. Those are the kind of things you want to be able to identify from whatever system or whatever sensor inputs you have into your system. So to that end, what we've then done, since I saw this last year summer, what we then done is the first thing is, okay, we need our own data. So the first thing I did was, okay, I'm going to make the first data set for autonomous driving for South Africa. And the first thing I did, we bought a couple of dash cams, cheap dash cams with my friends, and then we mounted them in their cars to drive around in South Africa, and then they load data for me whenever they go to work, wherever they go on a daily basis, right? And this is an effort, a collaborative effort with my friends back in South Africa, my co-founders, and some collaborators from the University of Texas, right? It's a big team in Texas that is well known for self-driving cars, right? Cool. And we plan to submit this paper to CVPR in November, right? So like I said, 2 dash cams, each was kind of like $100. We have about 1,000 15-second videos collected. Each of them we're recording at like 25 frames per second. So about 4.2 hours of monocular recording, meaning one camera facing forward. That equates to around 375,000 images of size 1920 by 1080 pixels. And then we just recently bought a stereo camera as well. For that, we have around 3 hours of driving because we only bought that recently. And one of the problems, again, why this kind of thing is hard to do in South Africa, I had to actually buy this camera in the US and ship it to South Africa, right? But with the dash cams, those are kind of normal now, but something more custom like a stereo camera, you have to buy it elsewhere and ship it. So now you can imagine how much harder it would be if I were trying to buy something like a LiDAR setup, right? So that's kind of that. And then as it stands, the task we are trying to perform, we have these inputs. We want to know where to drive, meaning drivable road area. We have RGP, meaning the input image. We want to know depth, how far are things, and then object detection, where are they, and so on. And then at the end, we want to predict the waypoint. Where should I go in the next 10 frames and so on, right? And to do that, this is kind of what it looks like at the end, the image you're seeing. So you'll see that you recognize where traffic lights are, you recognize cars, and kind of an estimate of how far they are, so metric depth. And then we can show in the blue, you see on the side, it's kind of like it's suggesting you can be in this lane. You can actually go into that space, right? That's kind of what the image you're seeing is telling you. And then the color you're seeing, the further things are, then they're colored more yellowish today. And the closer they are, more blue, right? Cool. And then now, if we go into detail in terms of each object, so for example, I say drivable road, depth estimation, object detection, and waypoints. If we go into what each of them looks like, this is what it looks like. So that's object detection. We want to know what things are and where they are, and can we localize them exactly and say that's a car. Although we are doing this in 2D, you can do this in 3D as well. However, the current setup we have is 2D. So it tells you exactly where things are, what they are. And that's important in terms of them being able to navigate and avoid obstacles. And then we also have depth, like I mentioned, because we are interested in knowing how far are things. And to do that, there's two ways. We use pre-trained models to tell us the depth of each pixel, meaning how far each pixel is in an image in a molecular kind of setting. But we then also bought recently a stereo camera so that we have true depth, because the stereo camera will tell you true depth. What the models we use to tell us depth, they give us relative depth. That means the difference is it tells you only this is closer than that thing, but it doesn't really know, is it 10 meters, is it 2 meters, both of them, right? So we have those two setups, molecular depth. We use models that tell us how far things are from each other, so it's relative. But the stereo camera we have now tells us exactly the distance in meters of where things are. And you can imagine if you combine these, you have a more robust way of telling how far things really are. And it's in that it's in the duplication of the sensor that we get a more robust solution for that. And then finally, not finally, actually, we still have one more sensor to go. So with surface norms, that kind of tells you the orientation of surfaces in a 3D setting. So it tells you if there's a bulge, it will show that there's that. So you will see that in the image before, there's potholes, but depth does not pick up on potholes, right? And you can imagine it's important in a setting where the car is going to drive, it should know when there's a pothole. It's not an obstacle per se in the sense that you might hit it. It's not an upright thing, but you don't want the car to go into a pothole because then it skews everything, right? You'll see that we don't have that in depth, and that's why surface normals are important, because then it shows up in the surface normals that the road is uneven. Then the car will know to avoid, right? That's that. And then we also have drivable road, like I mentioned. Drivable road kind of tells you, okay, it's safe to drive here. The road is open up front. That's what it looks like as the input. And then when we then do the prediction after the models change, that's what it then looks like. Right? You'll see that it's a bit noisy there, but then after training and everything, then it's a little bit cleaner. It can tell you exactly. And I like how you'll see the two lovers just walking on the side. You see how it immediately just curves to say that it's not safer closer. It's not just straight to say, oh, this is a better road. It's able to recognize that there's two people you might want to go a little bit to the right so you don't hit them. And then eventually the line you're seeing, the green line, is the waypoint. That's saying, okay, in the next few seconds, this is where you're going to be, or this is where you should go for safe driving. Right? Cool. And how do we do this? All of it. We take images, we take all the inputs I showed, and then we kind of ask some questions to make a model, an end-to-end model, learn a few things about the road and the conditions. So things like you want to ask, as in, okay, describe what's happening in the image. You use a vision language model to say, describe what's in the image. It kind of describes what's in the image. And you ask it questions like, okay, locate the objects and where they are. And you give it training data, meaning you give it the questions and the answers. Then you train it, and then eventually the real task you're going for is, okay, at the end of the day, tell me where I should be in the next 5 seconds. That's the end goal. But you want to train it in a way that you ask it all these other things, and the more it gets them right, that's where you are essentially infusing understanding of the situation into the model, right? And then finally, you are able to train something like that, meaning those are the inputs in your training, and then these are the outputs for the same question. So something like locate the object in the whatever. Then it says person, and then it tells you exactly where the person is. Locate the phrases in caption A, woman riding whatever. Then it tells you exactly where the woman riding a bicycle is, a bike is, right? Cool. Sorry. So now, at the end of the day, this is kind of a video to just show you what that then looks like once we train the model and we are running like prediction on that model. Right. It might be a little bit noisy. I don't know if this will actually, forgive me for the noise or the setting. Right. You'll see that the drivable road, it changes. The further you were, it was giving you the option that you could go behind the other car. But the closer you get to that car, then it says, no, you can't be that close to this car, right? You'll see that like as we are this far, yes, that was drivable road. And now it suddenly disappears because we are close enough. That's kind of what that looks like. Cool. Okay, let me just close this. Okay, now that you see what we are trying to aim for, you understand what the inputs are, what we are trying to do. At the end of the day, now the bigger problem, my friends live in this area here in Pretoria in South Africa. But then if this is to work, it means we have to have data across because the condition is not the same if you were in South Africa. You can see how much the climate in South Africa is so diverse. There's places where it's just desert, essentially. It's as hot as anything else. And you see normally if you've ever driven in a very hot, on a very hot day on a road that's like dry, there's always that mirage that you see in there. So that changes a few things, meaning if you live here, the driving conditions are not exactly as the other place. People there know how to drive in their conditions, people here know how to drive. E.g., if it snows somewhere, you're not going to just show up and drive in snow if you've never done it. There's some challenges to that, right? So now, we understand we have this problem, but my friends live here, they're not going to drive the entire country to collect this data. So we need a solution that's a little bit more, a little bit smarter solution to, okay, well, how do we then, how are we able to cover the rest of the conditions or climate conditions that they have, right? And the way we do it, we simulate the weather conditions and the kind of distortions that happen in different places, right? And the whole idea here is, okay, I'm going to start with the normal videos that I have, and I'm going to just throw some noise in them using these established methods to then create certain conditions or close enough to the certain conditions. For example, you give me a normal image. I'm like, okay, what if there's fog? I throw in fog into that, and then I train my model to be able to drive in foggy conditions, even though I've never actually collected data that has fog. Or, okay, that kind of mirage thing that I explained, when it's really hot, how do I get that if we've never done that? Then we simulate that kind of condition. Then we include that in our training data, and our model then is able to, one, learn how to remove the fog so that it sees things for what they are, right? So this whole process you're seeing here is we're going to take normal images, we throw in some noise, then we train the model to take in a noisy image and remove the noise, meaning take a foggy image and cover what does it really look like without the fog. That's what we so that it can drive as normal, right? So that's at the end of the day, we start with that, we add the noise, we add the fog, and then by the end, you want it to see clean and still be able to drive. Right? So that's the way we are solving. Oh, we're not going to drive to this desert place. we solve it by how do we simulate that situation and train our model. Cool. So an example of what that looks like, you see how normal image, then we add uniform fog. That's what that looks like suddenly. And if I didn't tell you this and look at it, you could think it's actually an image, a real image. Same as this, that's kind of what that looks like. And then in terms of the distortion, the mirage, you have a cheap camera. Normally, this is a cheap camera anyway, but if you have an even cheaper, at the end of the day, you have something like this. You could have something like this as a real image, realistic, because on the day, maybe the heat and so on, it makes it so that this is what the camera sees. Right? So what we do is we take a normal image, we turn it into this, then we train a model to remove this and we prepare it. Right? Cool. And this work will be presented at ICCV, which is going to be in Hawaii in October 29th. And all this work was done using the resources at UH, the computing, the storage, everything. I was using all that to do all this work. Right? And somehow I feel sad a little because I have to graduate at some point, and all those GPUs go away. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know. I think I might not graduate, right? So now the challenge is, meaning the reality of what I'm going to see if I graduate and I actually go and do this. It's quite expensive. One, right now, I'm not even thinking about GPUs because I get them for free, right? Storage, I get that for free. This is a lot of data I'm talking about. For example, with the stereo camera, one video, that's an hour, that's like 10 gig, one video, 1 hour. That's 10 gig, but I need a lot of these. I need to be able to store these somewhere and be able to process all that data somewhere, right? So the first problem, compute, it's expensive, storage, it's expensive, all that. And I haven't even spoken about the sensors themselves, right? One, I've already said, the stereo camera, couldn't find it. I had to buy it here and ship it to South Africa, right? And we are talking about just CD1 camera and CD, simple things. This is what a normal self-driving car looks like. That thing on top is around 60,000 or 30,000 now, dollars. That's a lot of money. And then all these cameras, around 6 cameras around it, like LiDAR, all that. It's quite expensive to get that done. And then another thing, getting the data and being able to label it is expensive on its own, because all those people are going to be like, oh yeah, here's a person, here's a car. Getting the training data in itself is expensive and very time consuming, right? So you can imagine how hard the task is. Not only is it just a hard task in terms of the technical portion of understanding how to do it, that's already a hard thing on its own. And thankfully, I am at UH and there's good people here who know how to do these things. So I get to benefit from that. So all these things that are hard, they're essentially a very hard thing because, especially in South Africa, it's already hard in the US. So now imagine how that looks like in South Africa. Right? Cool. And I spoke about the labeling portion of it, but because it's expensive and we're not going to hire people to actually do the labeling, I use existing models to label my data. But sometimes the existing models get things wrong, right? So there's noise in the labeling that I'm doing because I'm using existing models to give me the annotation or the labels I need to be able to train my models. But in that, there's some noise. Sometimes it gets things wrong. It's not as robust as you imagine. So normally there's this process, but because I'm substituting the people here, essentially in the labeling strategy, normally people, specialists, they label the data, and even with people, you can still get some noise. People get things wrong sometimes. But I'm using just the model. So you can imagine I have a little bit more noise in my situation, right? And then because of that, then I worked on this paper where I evaluated, okay, what do you do if you have label noise? How do you train AI models when there's label noise? So I went on and I did a whole review on how do you train models for classification, for example. How do you train models to actually end up with a robust model, even though the people or the data you trained on has had some noise, right? So that's where everything started. And after that, then I then worked on a separate paper where it's like, okay, now I understand the problem. This is how you do it. If you're going to train a model where there might be some noise, you might want to have some way of doing unsupervised learning, meaning look at the objects themselves and their similarity before the model tells you anything and group them on their own. So if you have a bunch of images of cars and cats and whatever, group them without anyone telling you what they are, just based on the similarity of the images themselves, And then whenever someone tells you what the thing is, if it differs too much from the groupings, then reject what they're saying and trust the groupings. That's kind of a method that we came up with for training in cases where there's label noise, right? And you can imagine this is going to be very important going forward because I'm not using human annotators for my self-driving because then it's too expensive to do that, meaning I have to then come up with new methods to actually get that done. And this work, again, same thing, all done using the good resources of CIS. And we published this paper in a journal around beginning of this year as well. And then the other model, actually not model, the other paper we then worked on the same way using the same resources and everything is the other question we have is, okay, does it really matter what model I use? Because when I'm at UH and the resources are there and I have the GPUs that are big enough, I can use the biggest model, right? But if I step away, I want to know, the next investigation that I did is, I want to know if I step away, I don't have the resources. What's the difference if I use a small model compared to a bigger model? Because a smaller model, I don't have to buy such an expensive GPU. I can train it on a much smaller GPU, right? And the storage, everything is slightly different. So I did this analysis to figure out, okay, if you have label noise, how much of a difference is there if I use a big model versus a small model? And the findings of that a little bit counter what you would think is there is a clear benefit to using a big model, but only to some extent. So it's not as clear as bigger is better all the time. There is an extent where it's like, okay, there's a sweet spot where you stop and just use a normal model, right? So that's another investigation we did using the same resources from CS. And then finally, these are the guys I work with to do this. This is the day we launched and decided we're going to work on this, right? In conclusion, little has been done in South Africa on this problem. Most of the solutions that exist out there are industry-based, not research-based, simply because of the monetization like component of it, because you can make money solving this kind of problem. So that's why most of these solutions are in industry. And the fact that it's so expensive, it means you need a lot of money to make it happen. Hence, it's industry, not much research, because industry gets funding, you can raise capital and all that stuff. And then in South Africa, I can understand the other thing I've looked into is there might be resistance to this just because it's a new thing. In general, there's always resistance to technology, but I think eventually the safety benefits and everything are so clear that it should work over time, right? That's it. Happy to take any questions.
If anyone online has a question, feel free to unmute yourself or drop your question in the chat. So I have a question. I'm happy to see that you did some of the simulations for climate. That was a question I had when you started your presentation. I'm not sure if because it sounded like you were just looking at the different climates in South Africa. But I was just a thought that came up for me is if this was applied to, other areas that, if there was like flooding on the road or things like black ice, like, were those things you maybe thought of or like considered kind of like simulating, and what do you think would be the challenges with your setup for kind of identifying those things?
For example, a simple one, what we went for here is, okay, the simpler cases, the cases that the simulation of the thing is easy. So simulating fog is not too hard. Simulating kind of that distortion is not hard. Simulating, for example, just rain, I tried that. There are not good models out there for simulating rain properly. If they exist, they are quite expensive to even get your hands on them and actually try and use them. But they might exist, for example, in games. You always see in games they have rain models and all that stuff. But to get your hands on that and it actually works is a very hard task on its own. It might actually even be easier to drive where there's rain than actually trying to simulate. So that's the one thing or snow, to simulate realistic snow. If I were to take this and actually try to get snow into this image, those kind of engines are fairly expensive in general, or you have to use existing engines that use data that's already there, not necessarily custom to your situation. So that's the only thing, as in simulating these, essentially the harder cases, we didn't have a way of doing that simply because they're expensive. And then what's the solution, or how am I going to go about it? Luckily for rain, it rains a lot where we are, so that we have lots of data on the rain out of it. It doesn't snow as much, so we don't have data around snow. And lucky enough, then it means we are rarely going to run into that problem because it doesn't really snow much in South Africa. But yeah, if it does, then that's when we then collect that kind of data eventually. And then the other way you could do it is you could supplement, although you can train your model on the conditions of driving in South Africa, but then you can also add other data that's not really South African data if you want to if you want your model to understand what rain conditions look like. But then you have to cater or make sure it doesn't then learn other things you're not interested in based on the driving conditions of that other place. So there's a couple of ways to do it. Yes. Thanks.
Do you have any other questions? Or anyone else?
Sure, yeah. So how do you handle like unusual situations? Like, let's say there's a delivery truck in front of you in like a residential neighborhood. Obviously, if you're a normal driver, you know to just go around it. But how do you tell the model in that specific case that you can go around it and sort of, I guess, technically break traffic rules? Like if it's just like in a neighborhood full of houses and there's a UPS delivery truck parked there or something, how does the model know that it is allowed to just go around it or specific like unusual cases like that?
So at least, so some of these things I'll say, oh, I've seen it, they solve it, but I actually myself right now, as it stands, I don't know how. I'm only learning the process as I go. But for example, you see, in this case, this is kind of the case I would think of if you say that. Meaning, it doesn't matter what you replace these people with. The model is always going to say that's not drivable road. So it's going to kind of skew it a little. In terms of, does it understand that it's breaking the law by going on the other lane to do that? I haven't gotten that far in terms of what does it understand yet. But as it stands, the kind of model I would have would be able to see that, okay, there's this thing, I can only drive this way. But then in terms of understanding in lanes, I haven't gotten that far. Yes, yes. Any other questions?
So Moseli, you were talking about, I think, some of the challenges with doing some of the like snow or things that like rain and things like that, and some other perhaps solutions that were expensive. Have you looked at any of like the digital twin type things, like stuff that NVIDIA might have, or things to generate perhaps some of this simulated
So, Sean, you could have
Turn your camera off.
You're breaking up, Sean, just so you know.
I think the last thing we heard was NVIDIA, at least for me.
Yeah.
I think you might be conference.
Something about the simulations and every
So the NVIDIA might have models the same. There's things that simulate other.
Okay, so the answer to that I'm hoping Sean gives me. Luckily, we applied to the NVIDIA Inception program.
We use good models
Simulations. Okay, so we recently, for that same reason, exactly that reason, especially also compute going forward, we recently applied and got it accepted into the NVIDIA Inception program. That will then give us access to some of these things, resources, meaning now I'm not as scared about graduating because I'll have the resources from NVIDIA because we got into the Inception program. Meaning these kind of digital twins and simulations like that will be a thing that we will look into because we are now part of that program. Yes. Okay.
Any last questions from anyone online? Anyone else in the room?
So it's like screen, I have a picture you have there.
Come again?
The car going out to driving to the green stuff on right. If it's skewed far enough. I mean, it's saying it can't drive there, but does the model start in the sense of like how wide the car is, like how much space it has to get around?
So almost like, does the car understand itself?
Yes.
Not explicitly. Not explicitly. So the way it works actually, at least on my understanding of this, is the car is almost only the cameras themselves. But then, so in my case, there's one camera, so the car is essentially that camera. And most of the predictions, since we record most of the predictions almost in the center of the road, that's what the car kind of understands. But in the case of like the actual cases out there, because they have all these cameras around almost at every corner, and they would know the distances between them. For example, if you ask me now with our stereo camera, I know exactly how far each lens is from each other because it's important. So I would imagine, to your answer, in cases where they have like multiple camera rigs and everything, they would know how wide the car is because they have to know how far each camera is from the other. So I would imagine those cars know how big the car is. But in my case, the car is essentially just the camera right now. Yeah.
How much calculation do you save getting the stereo link instead of making the stereo image from the two cameras you had previously?
So making stereo.
So initially you had two separate cameras, and
Yes.
then you went to stereo. And so I was just curious, like, you know, with the other cars that have many cameras on, obviously they're generating stereo in many directions.
Yes.
And so I was curious
How much?
calculation. You would say, like, is the stereo count itself giving you two images?
Yes.
Giving you,
So the stereo camera gives me two images.
and it's the fact that it's this fixed distance that gives you the calibration.
Yes. So because the camera sizes are fixed, we know if they look at any one point together, we can kind of tell how far that is. You triangulate, then it can tell you how far that is in meters because we understand how far the cameras are from each other, right? That's the first portion. But now, in terms of how much are we saving if we get that versus when we use the monocular camera? So before, when we had the monocular camera, we actually have to run an entire model that was trained using actual systems with LiDAR and everything that has seen a lot of. So it's estimating based on that. And that model is huge. So in my case, if I were to use that instead of using a stereo camera, I'd have to, for every time I'm driving, I'd have to constantly be predicting from this huge model how far things are. And that's a lot of compute. But if I switch to stereo, it's just real, it comes for free. Yes.
So it's quite a bit.
Huge, yeah. It's almost like I unplug an entire model. So I have a couple of models that are running to be able to say, okay, is this drivable road? Another model for the detection, and then the other model, the bigger model, decides how to drive. So you can imagine if you're running that those are like separate models that are predicting a couple of things. So moving to stereo, I'm essentially unplugging an entire model that probably requires like 12 gigs of RAM, of VRAM on a good GPU. I'm unplugging that essentially if I use a stereo camera.
You can save $50.
Yeah.
But in terms of there are obviously Waymo has some deep optics and very expensive LiDAR, but is your team keeping up on inexpensive LiDARs that are coming out? And I don't know anything about them other than some exist.
Yeah, actually, we haven't looked into them yet, simply because right now we're kind of building this like step by step. Whenever like the capability or the money comes up, then we buy the next thing to improve. So we started off with one camera on one car, and then the next month or so we bought the second camera on another car. So now I have two, and then now we just bought this. So as time goes, we will keep expanding on based on the availability. I'm hoping by the time I actually work on this full time, I'm hoping then there might be some good Chinese LiDAR systems that are out there.
Yeah. No, that's a huge amount of work.
Yeah. So, but the whole goal for me is I'm hoping we get to a point where we show good enough progress to get funded, so that shouldn't be a problem for us. I'm hoping that. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. there's no other questions, I think, yeah, that's it. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Moseli. Yeah, everyone give a round of applause for such a great talk. This was super interesting to hear about yeah, all the things that you've been investigating with processing this different data for looking at self-driving vehicles. So we're excited to see where you take it.
Sure. Thanks.